We covered in all throughout 2024 just over 50 mergers, acquisitions, and financial investments. And in addition, we covered nearly 20 funding rounds that were in the core of the language industry.
Happy 2025 and welcome back to SlatterPod. Hi, Esther.
Hi, Florian. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. 16 days in. How are you?
Yep, I'm holding up all right. Not too much of a shock to the system.
Not
25
too much.
is starting out all right.
25 starting out. All right. Same here. All good. Super cold. So envying anybody who's in warmer climes. Cool. So let's get started. Packed agenda. Got to catch up. Mostly tech and some cool stats coming out from LinkedIn about interpreting. So we're going to talk about first our new M&A report, M&A and funding report. Is it the 5th year running or do we know?
Could be
6th
longer.
year? Maybe
Could be longer. Yeah,
Okay.
2018 I think was the first one.
All right, so this is the 6th edition of our M&A and funding report where we compile very valuable information around mergers, acquisitions, startup fundings, and all kinds of other financial transactions in the language industry. It's out. I don't think we've ever published it that early in the year, so great. We're also going to talk about GPT-o1 or OpenAI's new O1 model, which is doing pretty well in translation, I think. You might have a different take, so let's talk about it. Synthesia, our friends at Synthesia, super hard for me to pronounce again. The avatar, multilingual avatar, and now they have a much expanded mission. They raised 180 million or something at a $2 billion valuation. Acrolinx, the content management technology company, has a new boss. Want to talk about DeepL's new product, DeepL Voice, that's getting its first big customer. Pocket Talk, then interpreters in the UK, and we may still, if we have time, we'll talk a bit about AWS and like they give us how to integrate TM in your machine translation, AI translation training. But first, M&A report 2024, looking back at all the good deals that happened last year. Tell us more.
Yeah, so as Florian said, yes, the M&A and funding report is now out, so do get your copy. I've selected a few of the sort of high-level stats that might be of interest. So we covered in all throughout 2024 just over 50 mergers, acquisitions, and financial investments. Of those, 80%, as usual, were trade sales, so big proportion of trade sales happening there. And in addition, we covered nearly 20 funding rounds that were in the core of the language industry. Many, many more outside of that. Also of relevance to our industry, of course. In terms of the biggest deals of the year, we had private equity firm EQT, which acquired Keyword Studios for $2.7 billion. That was the overall biggest deal of the year. And we also had on the trade sale side, biggest deal happening between Teleperformance and their Language Line Solutions division, an acquisition of ZP Better Together. That was for a total amount of $490 million. So two big deals happening there, yeah.
For our non-investment banking friends that are listening to this, what's a trade sale? What's the difference between
trade sale? I mean, in our terminology, we use it to describe company-to-company sales, and more often than not, sales of an LSP, let's say, to an LSP. So typically within the industry, but it's company-to-company rather than, for example, a financial investor acquiring a company.
All right. What other highlights do you have from the report?
Yeah, we had calling out some of the most active buyers of the year. That would be TransPerfect, Proprio, and also Translate One, all US-based buyers. Combined, they were responsible for nearly a quarter of all of the trade sales. So lots of activity generated from those three companies alone. On a geographic basis, we had companies in the US being most active in M&A, which is fairly typical. We had the US topping the list of countries, both for buyers and sellers. And then on a regional basis, Europe, which was had the biggest number of sellers.
US is buying Europe.
That's what it sounds like, right?
Not just Greenland.
So I'll say Europe buying Europe, but a lot of US activity on the buy side in particular there. So on the funding side of things, the biggest raise or biggest funding amount we covered in the core space was DeepL's $300 million raise. That was back in H1, first half of 2024. That was the single largest funding round and accounted for actually more than half, so about 60% of the funding that we calculated, or at least the disclosed amount of funding that was apportioned to startups in the language industry. So that was a sizable portion of the overall total. However, even excluding that, we had more funding amount flowing into the industry than in 22 and 23. Also, excluding DeepL, the average ticket size for startups would have been 14 million. So obviously a lot smaller than the 300 million, but nice chunk of change nonetheless.
All right. Yeah, DeepL obviously taking all the averages and medians and all of that into skewing the charts there a little bit.
Overweight there.
Overweight, yeah. What else did we find?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of more of a general take and observations from the year. We did see a market softening that was kind of continuing from 2023. So, overall deal volume that we tracked at least was down 10% in terms of the numbers. So from 23, there were 57 transactions that we tracked versus just over 51, in fact, in 2024. Obviously, a lot of factors coming into play there, both macroeconomic, so external to the industry, but also, as we've talked about many, many times, the sort of the impact of AI, LLMs, and companies, including potential buyers, adopting somewhat of a wait-and-see attitude when it comes to actually completing transactions there. With that being said, there was still a very strong deal flow. So meaning, the number of sort of potential deals that are out there or sellers that are on the market. There was, as we observed, an increased number of motivated sellers. So sellers, owners, founders looking to exit their companies. All of this is kind of coming together to make what we think is a very attractive M&A environment for buyers still. So becoming a buyer market. Buyers that are looking to grow and diversify, obviously still have their pick of companies that are out there. Then looking at the sellers, so what sectors are most appealing or seem to be most appealing to buyers based on the number of targets acquired within that sector. Some of the most hot sectors, I suppose, if you want to call it that: media localization, interpreting services and technology. Interpreting services and interpreting technology, sign language, and then in general access services and also language technology. Not a huge change really from previous years. Those areas or verticals, niches have tended to be both resilient and also interesting, stable. So appealing to buyers there. We mentioned already a boost in startup funding. So there was more funding generally within the core language industry than in 22 and 23. And sort of adjacent or kind of related to that, lots of investment into companies that we deem to be relevant for the language industry. So companies that might have translation as a feature on their platform, like Writer, the generative AI startup.
Yeah, or even like something like HeyGen or 11 Labs, or there's probably a dozen others that have these types of functionalities, right?
Yeah, so we continue to track and monitor those as well.
Anything about the outlook? I mean, what do we see for 2025?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit towards the end of 24 when we had Anna on the podcast as well. But I think we're going to continue to see increased consolidation, probably more so within those sectors that have typically been avoided major disruption, like I mentioned, media, interpreting, etc. Now that the dust has somewhat settled on the AI hype, I think buyers' view has become a bit clearer. So we're likely to see buyers being more able and willing to assess and then ultimately acquire targets. Lots at play, but I think overall probably a modest market recovery that you're seeing from publicly listed companies. The larger ones have started to deliver signs of growth, which obviously is a positive and reflects well on the industry. Lots that we could unpack, but I think those are some of the outlooks that I would want to share.
All right. And then we got the year started with Motion Point publishing a press release on Slator about buying Key Content. Tell us more. What do we know from the press release?
I was going to say it was a happy new year for Key Content and Motion Point. They were well, at least in our world, the first acquisition news of 2025. This is the acquisition of UK-based company Key Content, which is a multilingual content marketing agency that was acquired by Motion Point, as you said, the US-based website technology provider, and their backers Lakeview Capital. So yeah, interesting deal. Multilingual SEO. It's sort of localized content with this very high authority angle. Essentially, adding multilingual content creation capabilities to Motion Point, and with a enterprise level focus. So yeah, we had a quote from the CEO of Motion Point, Evan Kramer, from the press release saying, "Acquisition obviously enables us to help enterprises originate expertly crafted digital content that engages audiences more effectively." So looking at delivering content more in language, in culture, and in market.
Yeah, we know Pablo. We know Key Content. He was on the podcast.
That's right. Yeah,
and I've known him for a lot longer than that. I've known him for must be coming up to almost 20
years. Can you count the years? Yeah.
Maybe 17, 18 years, right?
Yeah, Pablo being the managing director of Key Content.
Of Key Content, that's right.
Staying on with Motion Point.
He's staying on. Great start of the year. So also what started the year for me was the GPT-01 model that all of a sudden becomes an option. Like when you log into ChatGPT, like it kind of, the drop down gets longer and longer and longer.
Yeah.
I think just yesterday they let me look this up. So the 01 model was put online maybe about 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly. And now yesterday something popped up, GPT 4.0 with scheduled tasks. Now you can, I don't know what that is. I need to check it out because it came out like literally yesterday. But
I just saw the mini model. Yeah.
The mini model, yeah. So now I get 00 with scheduled tasks, 01 mini. And then there's even more models. Yeah. Anyway, so I was playing around with the 01 model, which takes a lot longer because it's apparently reasoning, right? So I was prompting it to do translation, tested it on legal German to English, very, very good. The reverse also, English to German, really, really good. Takes a lot time, so it's not like, microseconds and like probably couldn't deploy it in like massive enterprise production yet. But I mean, it's incredibly good, at least according to my, I don't know, what was it? Maybe 30, 45 minutes test. I did QA, as it were, one translation. I found it really, really good. It seems
How long was the translation?
That was quite long, probably 500 words.
Like a page or 2 pages?
Yeah, 2 pages. Yeah, roughly 2 pages. Really good. Really, really good. Seems to be much more responsive to prompting because I've been trying this now for 2 years and I'll pretend to be a financial journalist, blah, blah, blah. And I never quite got it. Now can't say that anymore. It's a lot better. We also asked internally one of our writers, Seema. So she said it struggles with right to left languages, much more of a struggle.
Okay.
Still, just generally, I think to me it indicates just big progress by LLMs generally in translation. Right. And, we've had Unbubble on the podcast a year ago, and a lot of people would say, look, this is moving to LLMs, neurals, basically phasing out, etc. I think, we may have we may be crossing that river now where the LLMs are just doing translation. This is the default now. What about you? Did you play around with it?
Yeah, I did briefly. I mean, I tested French into English. Firstly, I just did 4 lines of a very, very simple text. And yes, it was very good. But what struck me, as you said, is that how long it took. I think it was 16 seconds for 4 lines of text, which, it's not very much. And it was very simple. So that seemed, it felt like longer, honestly. It felt like longer than 16 seconds. But that did feel, like a time that I had to wait. And I then tested it. I thought, okay, let's go to the other extreme. Tested it with a 20-page press release that was an annual report from, one of these financial banks, essentially. And that kind of had the opposite effect. So firstly, there's an attachment button. So I thought, great, I can, maybe attach a PDF, or I can attach a docx to just tell it, right, translate the attachment. But that doesn't work. So it seems like the attachment only seems to work, or the attachment function only seems to work for images like PNG, for example. So then I copy pasted 20 pages of this annual report into the chat, and it somehow managed to process it in 8 seconds. So a lot less time than it took for my 4 lines. And it also reintroduced formatting. So obviously I copy pasted it and all the formatting sort of disappeared, but when in the response, it reintroduced tables, bold, etc. So I got very excited, and then I realized, well, probably the English version of the report is available online already. So that makes it.
Did you check that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. So I didn't have time or the inclination to go and check if it had just, spat out the English version of the report, but that
would be amazing anyway.
Yeah.
And would be amazing.
Sometimes it can be hard to find those things online. You have to go to almost like an entirely different website. But yeah, it seemed to be good. Retained formatting, looked pretty much like an annual report. I don't know how you would get it out of there if you actually wanted to do anything with it, but copy paste
thing.
Button. Yeah.
All right, and that's the table stakes now, because that's the thing that we're paying $20 for a month. So, lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. I think it's still a big low resource language gap. But for the figs and the CTJKs and all of that, it's probably pretty good. Also pretty good is Synthesia's new kind of promo video. They did a video with the avatar, right? So Synthesia avatar company, multilingual, click a button, translate it, etc. UK based. They just raised 180 million, and they have a dedicated page where like the CEO's avatar is giving them, like, it's announcing the message, and I immediately headed over to the German, and it sounds pretty good. So
very nice.
It's the general, just the fluffiness of the English announcement doesn't work that well in German, but that's more kind of a cultural thing. But I mean, generally from a pronunciation and a presentation and a translation point of view, it's quite well done. So anything else to add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, just to add, you already mentioned the amount of the funding. The funding round was led by NEA and also new and existing investors. They shared a little bit in the press release about how the funds will be used. So they're saying, obviously, on product innovation, hiring talent, and also with expanding into North America, Europe, Japan, and Australia. So interesting markets there. I suppose you've got the sort of, English speaking, and then Japan, Europe. And they talked about valuation, which I think you mentioned, just over $2 billion US. They say they've got more than 60,000 customers now, and are claiming to be the most valuable generative AI media company in the UK. So, yeah, congrats.
Yeah, really congrats. I just looked it up. We did the podcast with their CEO, with Victor Riperbelli, back in mid-2021.
Okay.
So they've come a long way, a very long way.
Yeah, I think we followed them since their seed round, or since a very small sort of Series A, whenever they did that back in 2018, I think.
How is that something people want to fund with 330 million? Like, give me the use case. So you got the avatar, it speaks a bunch of languages. Okay, it's the lip sync.
Corporate communications, I think, was their thing. They were talking about wanting to replace like the PDF for internal communications. Obviously, this is going back a little while, but so rather than communicate with employees that way,
you still have to listen to it, right? So it's kind of, every time I bumped into one of those avatars, it was like interesting, but then it takes a while. Like, and if you want to actually if you watch something, it should be probably a real person. Then it's interesting. If it's like an avatar.
Yeah, I think my problem with it is that it doesn't really allow you to go at your own pace very easily. So whereas with reading something, you can kind of skip or skim something. With a video, you're kind of at the mercy of however long somebody wants to dwell on a topic. Like, okay, yes, you can kind of skip forward a little bit, but you don't really have the same, okay, I'll skim read it and then I'll zoom in on the bits that are super interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, you could probably speed up the replay.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. This is we're talking about the obvious limitations of it. There's got to be some bigger, broader vision behind this that allows them to raise that much money and get so many people excited about it. If it's just about, oh, here's an avatar, we put it on your website and explains a product, or like an e-learning or something, that's probably not going to get everybody excited. So I really wonder.
Well, maybe you need to get them
is.
back on the podcast again.
It's a little harder now. It's harder to get those unicorns on the podcast, but who knows?
True.
Victor, if you're listening, standing invitation, come back, explain it to us, or speak at SlaterCon London or something. New CEO for a company that's a little older than Synthesia is Acrolinx, German-based, originated from the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence. When that probably was founded like in the 70s or something. Somebody fact check me on this, but probably 70s, 80s. When artificial intelligence was in its maybe second or third, I don't know, iteration or something. Definitely don't know. So Acrolinx helps large organizations. They mention clients like Microsoft, Meta, Siemens, produce content that meets exacting quality and compliance standards at scale. So basically, just making sure that content across big organizations is aligned with all the different style guides, restrictions, compliance, stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, there's multilingual components to it. So that's why we're talking to it. They were originally founded by Andrew Bradenkamp, who we had on the podcast. He's exited a while ago, and he's now, running Clear Global, like the former Translation Without Borders. So Clear Global, the tech part of it. And we had him on the podcast. Go check it out. Very interesting conversation. New CEO is called Matt Bloomberg. Bloomberg with a U, not two O's. And he's succeeding Volker Schmidt, who ran the company for 5 years. And so one of the big plans of Matt Bloomberg is to expand in the US, where all the action is happening. All right. Now, DeepL issued a press release for announcing their first big enterprise customer for their DeepL Voice product. So we all know the DeepL translator, and then maybe a year ago, they launched DeepL Write, enhance your writing and adapt to your audience. And now they launched DeepL Voice, which is basically, speech-to-speech interpreting, AI interpreting. And they wrote that NEC, I keep reading this as NEC, but it's NEC, is the first company worldwide to deploy DeepL Voice for real-time AI speech translation. Japanese company, generally in Japan, big problem, right? English level tends to be relatively low in Japan, and very big domestic economy. So basically, international business is somewhat challenging for Japanese business people. So that's why it's a great market for something like this. We couldn't test the feature, DeepL Voice, that is, because it's still in the contact sales stage. Like, so if you go to the product, you can't just sign up and test it, like, we did with 11 Lab or HeyChan or something. It says contact sales, so it's kind of more enterprisey. And so NEC group, they, big group, 50 countries, saying they're driving digital transformation and implementing a range of work style transformation, etc. So they integrated DeepL Voice with Teams, Microsoft Teams. And they were very precise. They said they began using it on December 1st, 2024. So the press release was kind of an interesting press release. It kind of went into, it was fairly fluff-free. It was quite specific. So yeah, they said they began using it on December 1st. Then they said that NEC was actually a DeepL client before, an enterprise client for DeepL Pro and the API. So yeah, kind of an upsell. Congrats to DeepL, launch a new product, get a big enterprise client. Now, in a similar space is a company called Pocket Talk, which keeps releasing a bunch of news and press releases. So we wrote about them, I don't know, when was this? I think in March 2024, they were targeting an IPO, initial public offering, with like $500 million valuation. That didn't happen. Instead, they announced again that they raised $15.8 million US, or roughly $60 million US, for their voice translation or voice translator. I think it's a piece of hardware, actually. Yeah, Pocket Talk S2 works in 74 languages. Apparently, you don't need Wi-Fi. Meaning it's probably contained on the actual thing. and works in 170 countries. So apparently this company, Pocket Talk, is actually is partially owned by a company called SourceNext, which is listed on the stock exchange in Japan somewhere. A couple $100 million market valuation. So I don't know what to make of it. Maybe they're also saying that they're really kind of market leader in Japan. Maybe until people figure out that they can download DeepL voice. But
For Synthesia, yeah.
it's like, okay, the IPO didn't work for Pocket Talk. Now they keep raising. I wonder who they're raising from. Like, there's some kind of internal transactions, something to maybe at some point dig out. But yeah, we've been talking about them for a while, and they keep they keep putting out those pieces of news. Now, okay, we got 2 voice AI applications, but actually the human side of interpreting seems to be going well, even though I still think it's somewhat of a statistical fluke maybe, but tell us why it's supposed to go well, at least in the UK where you're based.
A statistical fluke, but yeah, perhaps. But we published a piece quite recently from LinkedIn News. So this is based on something that LinkedIn News put out, which is its Job Trends 2025. So I suppose looking forward, but also based on data for the past 3 years, they published the 25 fastest growing jobs in the UK. And surprise, surprise, interpreter was at number 22 on the list. So this includes both spoken language and also sign language interpreting. And the idea is if you feature on the list, then these are jobs on the rise, where LinkedIn is perceiving that there's the greatest career opportunity based on, I think, past 3 years of data or something. And they say sectors or scenarios where interpreters are in demand includes translation and localization, museums, historical sites, zoos, and transportation equipment manufacturing. So there you have it.
Hang on.
You're an interpreting...
That's what LinkedIn says, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're an interpreter looking for work, just hit up your local zoo and see if they've got any appointments for you.
Okay, come on. But like, how serious can we take this?
Who knows? But I mean, we have some other... It's like anything on LinkedIn,
Zoos.
you know.
Zoos? Like, really? Like,
We love our zoos. We love our zoos in the
There's
UK.
thousands of interpreters lining up to interpret in zoos.
Hey,
Historical
it's a great
sites.
tourist attraction.
Stonehenge. There's like 500 interpreters waiting for all those visitors.
Could be. I've never been. Yeah,
you've never been?
I've never been to... No, not to Stonehenge, no. I've gone past
to a
it.
zoo?
I've never stopped. Oh, of course I've been to a zoo, yeah.
Just kidding. Without an interpreter?
Well, yes, thankfully. I mean, I
Wouldn't
never get any kind of guide. I would never have a tour guide for a zoo. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
what are
Zoo
they
is the
telling
thing. Wouldn't zoo be the thing where you kind of go without a guide or an interpreter?
I can understand the museum and sort of cultural,
Yeah.
cultural sites. But
I mean,
I don't need someone to explain the elephant.
Yeah, correct.
Anyway.
All right. All right, LinkedIn,
yeah.
thank you for pointing out that valuable data that there's apparently massive
for a good
demand
laugh.
for zoo interpreter.
Yeah.
If you are a zoo interpreter, please like and subscribe and maybe make a comment below
We'd
on
love to
YouTube.
hear from you.
We'd love to hear from you. All right, let's close on another story here. AWS, so the Amazon Web Service, the biggest and probably most profitable part of Amazon. I'm not sure, but they keep putting out these kind of really useful how-tos for machine translation. And one of the most recent ones, like on just a week ago, on their machine learning blog, was titled "Evaluate Large Language Models for Your Machine Translation Tasks on AWS." Sure, you got to run everything on AWS, which is what many people do anyway. But then they're kind of describing how you work with real-time MT using all kinds of foundation models. So they're not just pushing their own, but they're saying, hey, you can also plug in Anthropic, Cohere, Meta, Mistral, Stability, and of course Amazon using a single API. So they were talking about especially how you can leverage translation memories, and they're saying. There's no standard method to integrate past translation knowledge. That's what they're saying from TMs into LLMs, but they're saying there's you can use the TMX file exchange and then basically RAG these systems to to become better and customize. It's an interesting article. I don't want to butcher it too much. We did a pretty good overview, and there's a link to the original article. So if you're in that space, go check it out. And if you're building on AWS, of course, then you're probably already aware of it. Cool. All right. So let's end here. Head over to the website. We're going to be launching Sliticon Remote in London for registrations in about a week, maybe early next week. So get your ticket. We're working very hard behind the scenes to put on a great show, great guests, great agenda, great speakers, and panelists. All right, that's it for today. Have a good start to 2025 and see you soon.